December of 1944, and if you know much about world history, you would know that's late in World War II. In December of 1944, the Japanese sent a young lieutenant. He was 22 years old, and they dispatched him to lead a small group of soldiers to a small Philippine island, and they were given clear instructions. They were to hold the island at all costs. They were to disrupt enemy operations in every way they could, and they were told never, ever surrender. His superior officer told him, it may take a year, it may take us 3 years, it may take us 5 years, but I promise we will come back, and until then, make sure that you keep fighting. Well, that lieutenant's name was Hiroo Onoda, and that occurred in December of 1945. Well, you know what was going on. That occurred in December of 1944. So D-Day has already happened, so you've got the Allied powers are taking Europe. We're island hopping in the Pacific and finally beginning to rein in and tighten the noose on the neck of the Axis powers. So first there's Victory in Europe Day, and then there's Victory in Japan Day. So that occurs August, September of 1945. So the war has ended by the time you get to September of 1945. But think about this. If you're sitting in the jungle of a Philippine island, do you hear about that? Well, no, you don't hear about that. And so he is continuing to fight. His fellow soldiers are continuing to fight. And there are Allied airplanes that were dropping leaflets in Japanese that said, the war is over, but they got those and said, no, that's the enemy's propaganda. They're lying to us. They're trying to trick us, trying to bring us out in the open so that we can be captured or killed. And so they continued to fight, even after September of 1945. By 1950, one by one, his companions are gone. One surrenders. Another is killed in a skirmish with police in 1954, and the last fellow soldier he had with him was killed in 1972. But in 1972, he is still, I'm not making this up, you can look it up yourself. In 1972, he is still fighting in this jungle island of the Philippines under the assumption that World War II is still going on and he will not surrender. The Japanese government sends search parties. They've gotten word that this guy is still fighting, and so they send people to him, and he doesn't believe them. Finally, there is this Japanese adventurer that seeks this guy out, and he says, listen, the war is over. I'm telling you the truth. You're out here, you're doing all this for naught. You're still eating coconuts and bananas and stealing from the locals, just causing mayhem, and you don't have to keep doing that. And this Japanese soldier told him, unless I get an order from my superior officer, I'm continuing to fight because that was my order. And so he continued to do that until the Japanese were able to find his superior officer. His superior officer by this point is an elderly man who's working in a bookstore. And the Japanese government gets him. They get him to this island in the Philippines. They find this guy in the jungle. And his officer now, this commanding officer relieves this, what had been a young lieutenant who is now 52 years old, relieves him of his orders and shows him the documents of surrender. This guy had been fighting for 29 years. 10,761 days he continued to fight even though the war was over. He's continuing to operate with this weight of responsibility and this obligation to keep going and to keep fighting and to keep doing all of these things, even though the truth is the war is over. He's continuing to lug that responsibility around. Why? Because he did not really know the truth. There's a spiritual parallel to that. In fact, there's perhaps many of them, but one I want you to think about is this. There are burdens that you and I, as followers of Christ, can be, and many are continuing to lug around. And we've talked in recent weeks about some of those. We've talked about grief. We have, I can't remember what last week was about. It was riveting. But we talked about something else last week. And then, but today I want you to think about this, about guilt. Some of you came into this place today, and you might have been all smiles, and people around you may have no idea, but inside, you know there is this burden that you drug into this place with, and it's guilt over choices that you have made. Guilt over sin, guilt over ways that you have acted and responded, guilt over ways that you have betrayed trust, guilt over ways that you have acted. And you came into this place, again, you're all smiles, oh, hey, how are you doing? It's glad to see you. You're doing all that, but inside there is this enormous weight of guilt that you are carrying. And the reality is that many are continuing to carry that because they don't understand the truth about guilt. You say, well, Michael, what if that's the case, what is the truth about guilt? That's the question we want to think about today, because I believe God's word answers that for us. And by understanding the truth about guilt, hopefully we can realize that, respond to it, and maybe, just maybe, you can leave this place without that excess baggage. All right, so what does God have to say about this? Look with me in your Bibles today to John chapter 21. As you're turning there, I want to give you one verse that serves as the context, or the end of the context for what we're going to see, and that comes in Matthew 26. You're turning to John 21. We're going to read 15 through 19 there. But Matthew 26, verse 75 says this, that Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. All right, so that's on the eve of the crucifixion of Jesus. Then in John 21, starting with verse 15, we read this. When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." "Feed my lambs," Jesus told him. A second time he asked, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." "Shepherd my sheep," he told him. He asked him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved that he asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." "Feed my sheep," Jesus said. "Truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you would tie your belt and walk wherever you wanted, but when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will tie you and carry you where you don't want to go." He said this to indicate by what kind of death Peter would glorify God. After this, he told Peter, "Follow me." In this passage, we've got a guy that is carrying guilt around. And that guy is Peter. And his experience and what God records for us about the experience of Peter, I believe, communicates to us a couple of basic truths about guilt that I believe sincerely God wants me, he wants you, he wants us to understand. And the first reality is this: God intended guilt to be unpleasant. God meant for guilt to be unpleasant. All right, so that we've got the context fully as to what's going on. Back in Matthew 26, this is just before the crucifixion, Jesus has made this statement, and he is prophesying what is going to happen. And he says to the disciples, he says, "All of you are going to fall away because of me." So he's indicating that they are going to abandon Jesus. And Peter says, that is not going to happen. I mean, it may happen to them, but it's not going to happen to me. I am with you through thick or thin. I'm with you if it leads me to jail. I'm with you if it leads me to the execution place. I am with you. Doesn't make any difference. And I think Peter said that believing it to be true. That was how he felt, how so strong it was that he felt about his commitment to Jesus. And you recall what Jesus said to him. He said, "Listen, before the rooster crows tomorrow," so in the span of less than a day, "you're going to deny me not 1 time, not 2 times, but 3 times." At that point, Peter doubles down. He says, "It's not going to happen." Well, you know what happens. That evening, Jesus shares the Passover meal for the final time with the disciples. They've gone out to Gethsemane, and the peace and the solitude of Gethsemane is interrupted as soldiers come in. Judas kisses Jesus on the cheek, indicating exactly who he is. And so Jesus is now taken into custody. He's been arrested, and all the disciples scatter. Jesus is going that night through a series of sham trials that are going to result in an execution order by crucifixion. As that is going on, Peter is not getting a good night's rest. He hasn't gone home to say, well, I'm going to see if I can just sleep and wake up and all this is a dream. He doesn't do that. He is still out and about. And as he is out and about, he is first, a young woman sees him, a girl, and she sees him and she says, aren't you one of those disciples of Jesus? No, you have me confused with somebody else. And then a little bit later, in that same evening, this woman comes up to him and said, you're one of those guys with Jesus, aren't you? I remember, I've seen you before, haven't I? No. You've got me again confused. And then there's a group of people that are sitting by a fire that Peter comes up to, and wait a minute, you're one of those guys with Jesus, and he even curses to say, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No sooner has he done this now for the third time, it's almost morning, and he hears a rooster crow in the distance. And what does Matthew tell us? That Peter weeps bitterly. Bitterly. The word that's translated there, bitterly, literally means with anguish. Why exactly is Peter weeping with anguish? Why is he weeping bitterly? Well, sorrow has to factor into it. I mean, for one thing, he likely is aware that, Jesus has been arrested unjustly, probably hearing some of the word about what's going on in these trials, likely has, at this point, by morning, heard that the execution order has been given, and so everything that he's committed himself to for the last 3 years, it looks like it's going up in smoke, and he's so sad by this. Maybe he's also weeping too because he's fearful something's going to happen to me. All of those are reasonable options, but I think we can all guess and accurately guess the primary motivation for Peter's tears. Because when he hears that rooster crow, he knows Jesus said, I was going to do what I have just done 3 times. I swore it would never happen, but it's happened 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. And he is profoundly grieved by this. Why? Because I believe he feels profoundly and reasonably guilty for this. Now, I think that has to do with the very nature of guilt itself, because I believe our experience of guilt is very much linked to the act of something being broken. And by that I mean that we feel guilt because a standard, some sort of rule has been broken. We have violated that. Or maybe there is trust that we have had placed in us that we have broken that. And because of this, because something has been broken, we feel guilt. And the value of what we have broken, the consequence of what we have broken, I think shapes the volume, the intensity, and the weight of the guilt that we experience. And so you have Peter at this point. He has violated God's standard in the sense that he's lied 1, 2, 3 times. But not only that, but he has broken the trust of Jesus, the vow that he had made that said through thick and thin, through prison, through death, whatever, I'm with you. And he didn't even make it a night. He didn't just fail 1 time, he failed 3 times, and he feels profoundly guilty about this. And Matthew tells us that he wept bitterly with anguish. Why? Because something had been broken, something that was valuable, something that really mattered. It felt bad, and I want you to understand this. God intends for it to feel bad. He wants guilt to be unpleasant. Well, why would, we've got Unitarians up there, they've got all the love flags and the happy smiley faces going. That doesn't seem, God would want me to feel bad? That doesn't gel with what I think. Why would God want me to feel so bad, so ill about myself, so weighted down by what I have done? That's not nice. Well, let me ask you this. Some of you have like an internal alarm clock because you've woken up at the same time for years, and whether you're on vacation, whether it's the weekend, whatever it is, you wake up at that particular time every day. Your body's just kind of in the routine. Others, though, the only way that you can be on time for something if it occurs before noon is for there to be an alarm clock. And so there are those of you that were here for Sunday school, you're here for worship service today because there was an alarm clock that sounded this morning, whenever that was that you got up. Let me ask you, what did that alarm clock sound like? Was it the sound of crashing waves in the distance? Was it the sound of a little trickling, babbling brook? A gentle symphony playing? No. It sounds like you are strangling a vulture with your bare hands. And it's over there screaming. Well, some of you have natural gas at your house, or you have a grill that has a propane tank. And I'm not sure exactly when it was that this happened, but the government mandated, because propane and natural gas don't have a smell. And so what they have mandated is that this chemical be added to that mix that causes natural gas and propane. Does it smell like a pleasant perfume? Nice loaf of fresh baked bread. The perfume counter at Belk. No, it smells like rotten eggs. Why is that? Why does it smell so bad, and why are our alarms so annoying? Because we need these things to get our attention, to help us to realize something is really, really wrong. If there is gas that is pouring into your home or gas that is pouring out of this grill, you should want to know that, because hopefully you don't want to die in an explosion. You want this sound to be so alarming to you. You want this sound to be so unpleasant to you that it awakens you. It draws you out of a lulled sleep to alertness and to awakeness, because otherwise you would just stay in the bed. We need things that are unpleasant, because those unpleasant, those distasteful experiences generate reactions in ways in us that nothing else does. Why does God want guilt to be unpleasant? It's for exactly the same reason. You and I have broken something. We have broken His standard. We have broken that commitment. We have violated that trust. We have violated that vow. We have broken something, and God wants us to realize something is afoot. There is an actual problem. And so the best way for that to happen is for you to have a feel that is entirely unpleasant. And regardless of what culture says, you know that guilt is real, it is unpleasant. And understand this, God intended it to be that way. But that's not the only truth about guilt. It's also true this, that God intended for the experience of guilt to be temporary. God intended for the experience of guilt to be temporary. The distance between what we read in Matthew 26 and what we read in John 21 is a week, or at least a week. And you recall that you have the crucifixion of Jesus on Friday. He is buried. The resurrection occurs on Sunday. And there are a number of instances over the next 40 days before Jesus returns to heaven where he encounters people. The resurrected Jesus encounters people. He encounters the women at the tomb. He encounters the disciples. He encounters the guys that are journeying on their way. So there's all of these instances that we have of Jesus appearing and encountering people. On this particular day, what has happened is that the disciples are doing what they have known before, which is fishing. And Jesus comes to them that morning, and there's this miraculous haul of fish, and then they start the day with a delicious, delicious fish breakfast. Anyway, so they have, the morning starts with fish, and they have just eaten breakfast when we have this exchange that happens starting in verse 15. Jesus looks at Peter, and just imagine what Peter has been thinking, because until this point, Jesus hasn't actually directly dealt with Peter at all. The last direct interaction was, "You will all deny me." And Peter says, No, not me. I'm with you through thick and thin, in freedom or in prison, in life or in death. I am with you. Jesus says, no, you'll deny me 3 times before the morning. Before the rooster crows, you'll deny me. And that's exactly what has happened. And Jesus hasn't said anything about that. Now, Jesus, it seems, is getting ready to deal with that. And you just got to imagine Peter has been probably sitting there thinking, and just trying to keep his head down. Hopefully Jesus isn't going to notice. You know how we operate when we know we've done something wrong and we just want to keep a low profile, hoping the storm just kind of passes. And so Jesus says, Simon, do you love me more than these? And there is some question about what Jesus is referring to. Is he talking about these fish? Is he talking about something else? Or is he potentially talking about the disciples? And I really believe that Jesus here is talking, and the question to Peter is, do you love me more than the rest of the disciples? Now, why do you think that question would be of consequence? Because you remember that Jesus has said, hey guys, all of you are going to fall away because of me. And Peter says, no, that's not going to happen. It may happen to them, but won't happen to me. Which is, in effect, to say, I love you more than the rest of them. I mean, their commitment is up here, but mine is up here. And so Jesus says to him, hey, do you love me more than these? And I've got to kind of think, and as I imagine this unfolding, Peter doesn't make eye contact with Jesus, just kind of keeps his head down. Yes, you know that I love you. And so Jesus says, feed my lambs. And I don't know if it is immediately or if it's moments later. It could have been immediate that Jesus asks a second time, hey, Simon. And it's interesting, he doesn't call him Peter. He calls him the name before Jesus ever encountered him. That was his given name, his birth name. He doesn't call him Peter. He says, Simon, do you love me? Maybe he even gets a little quieter because it's these questions are starting to get a little closer to home. Yes, you know I love you. And so he says, shepherd my sheep. And then he says a third time, Simon, do you love me? And John tells us at this point, Peter was grieved when he asked him the third time. When he asked him the third time, it seems pretty clear what's going on. Jesus is confronting the reality of what Peter has done. And how does he feel? He feels terrible. And one of the things that he says in response to Jesus' question is this, Lord, you know everything. And that includes not only his affection for Jesus, but includes also the failures, the ways in which he has lied, the way he has abandoned the cause of Jesus and stepped away, said, I have nothing to do with this. Jesus, you know all about this. And how does Peter feel about this? He feels terrible. And it's easy to look at this and say, I don't like that. I don't like that. I mean, Jesus is kind of throwing salt in the wound, isn't he? He's dragging up stuff. He's just not letting the past stay in the past. He's rubbing Peter's nose in his failures. That doesn't seem very nice, does it? That doesn't seem very Jesus-like. That doesn't seem very loving. That's very unpleasant. He's taking the guilt and he's turning the volume up. He's turning the displeasure up. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Except what does Jesus do? Jesus recommissions him. Having confronted his failure, what does he do? He says, I've got plans for you. I want you to feed my sheep. I want you to shepherd my people. I want you to tend to those that are following me. And the day is coming that you're going to wind up, he's foretelling the type of death that Peter was going to have. And he finishes by saying this at the end. This is what I want for you. I want you to follow me. So hear me in this. The intention was for Peter to feel bad, to experience guilt, and it to be entirely unpleasant. But the aim, I believe, was that it would gather and garner Peter's attention to generate a response, to generate a change in direction so that Jesus could say, I'm not done with you. I'm not through with you. I want to use you. I want to put you back on the field. Now that I've gotten your attention, now that you are affected by all of this, let's get back in the game, and I want you to follow me. Back in 2007, I don't remember how big the area was. I'm certain that Greensboro was affected by this. We were still living in Charlotte at that point, but that particular summer, I don't know if you recall, it was especially dry. And we went through, it seemed like week after week after week after week. It's like the opposite of this jungle summer we've been experiencing, but it just didn't rain. And in Charlotte, I guess in Greensboro, they were doing some of the same things, but after this had gone on for a little while, they started to put some water limitations on. And so the city said, all right, there's no watering of lawns or washing your car except on, if your house number is odd, you can wash it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or then Tuesday, whatever the other odd days are. So we're doing that. And then finally they say, no, there's no lawn watering, there's no car washing, there's none of this, because it's getting pretty critical. So don't use water. Well, that makes sense. We don't have a whole lot. Stuff is drying up. And so then the city water department, news comes out that they're saying, well, because people are not using water, you know what? We're not making any money. So what we're going to need to do, because you're using less water, we're going to have to raise the rate. But it's just, we're just going to get through this. We're going to raise the rate, and then we'll get through this, and then we'll be even Steven. Well, that was in 2007. But what do you suppose has happened? Did the rate go down? No, I'm sure it's been raised multiple times since then. In Greensboro, likely the same thing happened. And what was intended and presented as being temporary became perpetual. Perpetual. But it shouldn't have been this way. Listen, that's how I believe God wants guilt to work in my life and in your life. To be stinging, to be unpleasant, to be foul, to be alarming to us, so that it gathers our attention and leads us back to Jesus, back to his admonition to follow him, and then we deal with that failure, and we get back in the game so that the guilt can go away. The aim was not for it to be perpetual. This is not supposed to be a life sentence. The aim is feel bad, get your attention, rattle your cage, draw you back to him, get back on the field. But too many times, what do? We operate like that water rate increase. Well, I can't believe that I did that. I feel so bad. And we are racked by and weighed down in perpetuity over the failures of the past. God intended it for it to be unpleasant, but he also intended it for it to be temporary. He intended to get your attention so that you would come to him, so that he could restore you, get you back in the game. But once that has happened, that the guilt should go. At the outset, I said that some of you might have come into this place this morning weighed down. I mean, haggard with what no one else can see. And maybe you had trouble sleeping last night. Maybe you've had trouble sleeping for a lot of nights. And when I talk about guilt, you're still smiling and nodding, hoping that no one might identify you. It feels terrible. God wanted it to feel that way. He did. Because he wanted to get your attention. Has there been a time when you finally owned up to it and said, Lord, you know the truth, and I am acknowledging the truth? Has he gotten your attention so that you come back to him? As you do that, listen, his goal is not to beat you over the head, not to kick you, not to do any of those things. His goal is to forgive you, to cleanse you, and to put you back on the field of following him. What I'm saying is that our feelings of guilt can go if and when we go to him. Will you bow your heads with me?